as the president, if you're not completely heartbroken by this tragedy, if you don't feel compelled to address it as a nation, to take accountability, there's just something simply wrong with your soul. And I'd say right now, for America, there's something truly wrong with America's soul. It's beyond unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at these images of these small children, the fact that our reporter on the ground currently there speaking to their mothers, the grieving families, and yet they're seeking answers. They want justice. And frankly, the Trump administration isn't even able to talk about where they are with this investigation, let alone any form of justice.
Right. And, I can confirm I am 100% confident. Well, one, that this was a U.S. strike. Two, that senior commanders knew this was a U.S. caused civilian casualty incident, at least within hours of this strike. So, the fact here is that, senior military command, Admiral Cooper, for example, Secretary Hegseth, up to the president, they are mandating orders of silence to the U.S. military. There are people in the military at senior commands, at central command, that want to do the right thing here, that of course want to mitigate harm to civilians. They don't want to kill civilians, that want to properly investigate when that harm happens. They want to acknowledge it, apologize, provide redress. And those people are being silenced and pushed aside, not just from a mitigation standpoint, how do we prevent this, but from a response standpoint, how do we respond to it when it happens? And what we're showing is, this secretary, this administration, believe they have complete impunity. They're not accountable to anyone, not the American people, not our representatives, not the global community, certainly not the Iranian civilian population, who they claimed on one hand at one point that they were going in to free, right?
Well, what does this tell you about the state of affairs at present? Because, I think about a series of incidents when the United States was prosecuting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Kabul drone strike, for example, in 2021. Initially, it was described as a righteous strike, and then it was later acknowledged by the Pentagon that it was a mistake and the families were given compensation. I mean, there's a whole host of incidents in Mosul, for example, in Syria as well, at the Baghuz airstrike, where there were investigations, and then the findings of those investigations were made clear. What does this tell you about this moment in the United States where we're just not really getting a sense of where these investigations are going?
Right. It's really a de-evolution of standing practices, and we haven't been perfect in the past. That's why the Pentagon Office for Civilian Harm Mitigation and Response was stood up initially to be better. But those instances that you name, and I'll go all the way back even to 1991, the first Gulf War, a tragic strike, a horrible strike on a civilian shelter that we thought was a bunker, killed over 400 civilians. Within 5 hours, the U.S. acknowledged it and apologized. The other incidents you name, we'll take the Kabul strike in 2021 and during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we hit an aid worker and his family. Well, we acknowledged that we conducted the strike immediately. Now, it did take a couple of weeks for the U.S. military to confirm on their end that, yes, they did mistakenly target civilians. But we acknowledged that immediately. And then, of course, once we confirmed that they were civilians, there was official apology. There was and continues to be redress to the civilian population there and the families involved. We see none of that here. It's just incredibly concerning. The de-evolution of standards, of practices, of lack of adherence to our own law and doctrine, and just the ethical and moral implications of this. And then I will add too, going to Admiral Cooper's statements, we are tracking, my colleagues at Air Wars and other non-governmental humanitarian conflict trackers are looking at upwards of 300 incidents of civilian harm in Iraq, or in Iran to date. So to say that the only incident so far is this school strike in Minab is purely error, or at worst, an outright lie.